My name is Norma, a 63-year-old retired math teacher from Boston. For years, I financially supported my daughter Amanda and her husband Derek, never expecting anything in return except basic respect. But at their anniversary dinner, Derek publicly humiliated me with cruel words that cut deep. While everyone laughed at his joke about me being a loser, I kept my composure and delivered a response that changed everything. Before I share my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family who took advantage of your kindness. I dedicated 35 years of my life to teaching mathematics at Brighton High School in Boston. My classroom was my second home, and my students were like extended family. I found purpose in helping young minds understand the beauty of numbers and equations. My husband John and I built a modest but comfortable life together. We were careful with our finances, saved diligently for retirement, and put aside money for our only daughter Amanda's college education. When John was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer 11 years ago, our world shattered. Despite fighting bravely through multiple rounds of chemotherapy and experimental treatments, I lost him just 8 months after diagnosis. At 52, I became a widow facing the empty silence of our family home alone. Amanda was 23 and in her final year of college when her father passed away. She was studying business administration at a private university that cost us $48,000 a year. John and I had always prioritized her education, believing it would give her the foundation for a successful future. We never complained about the financial strain because we wanted the best for our only child. It was during her final semester that Amanda met Derek at a campus networking event. He was 25, 2 years older than her, studying for his MBA and full of ambitious plans. The first time she brought him home, I was initially impressed. Derek was handsome, articulate, and charming. He spoke confidently about his business ideas and seemed genuinely interested in my teaching career. He helped with the dishes after dinner and complimented my home. I remember thinking he might be good for Amanda, who was still processing her grief over losing her father. They dated for only 11 months before announcing their engagement. Looking back, I should have seen this as a red flag. But Amanda seemed happier than she had been since John's death. The wedding was smaller than I had always imagined for my daughter, partly due to financial constraints after John's medical bills, but it was lovely nonetheless. The first hint of Derek's true character emerged during the wedding planning. When I suggested a more affordable venue, he made a comment just out of Amanda's earshot. "We don't need to pinch pennies like a teacher's salary requires." It was said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I brushed it off as pre-wedding stress. After the wedding, more comments followed, always when Amanda wasn't present. If I called too early on a weekend, some of us actually have important work to do, not just grading papers. If I brought homemade food, "We prefer quality dining, but thanks for the thought." Each remark was delivered with that same smile, making it difficult to call out without seeming overly sensitive. I never mentioned these comments to Amanda. She was building a new life with the man she loved, and I didn't want to create friction. Perhaps this was my first mistake, but I believed that maternal sacrifice included swallowing small hurts for your child's happiness. After graduation, both Amanda and Derek struggled to find stable employment. The job market was tough, and Derek's ambitious business plans required startup capital he didn't have. Amanda took temporary positions that never seemed to last, while Derek spent months developing business proposals that went nowhere. When they couldn't afford the rent on their apartment, I stepped in. Initially, it was supposed to be temporary help, just until they found their footing. I paid their $2,000 rent for what was meant to be 3 months. 3 months became 6, then a year. Derek never expressed gratitude for this assistance. Instead, he acted as though it was expected, even deserved. Amanda deserves to live in a nice place. he would say, implying that as her mother this financial responsibility was naturally mine. When I mentioned the strain on my teacher's pension, he dismissed my concerns. "You lived frugally your whole life. What else would you spend it on anyway?" My resentment grew, but so did my worry for Amanda. She seemed increasingly dependent on Derek for her sense of self-worth, adopting his opinions and habits. I continued supporting them financially, hoping it was truly temporary, telling myself I was really helping my daughter, not her increasingly disrespectful husband. By the 2-year mark, I had depleted a significant portion of my savings, but their financial situation hadn't improved. Derek was still chasing entrepreneurial dreams, while Amanda picked up occasional contract work. Each month, I transferred money for their rent, utilities, car payments, and sometimes groceries. I began to wonder how long I could sustain this support, but whenever I tried to discuss it, Derek would mention another promising business prospect just around the corner. I started having trouble sleeping, worrying about my dwindling retirement fund. But every time I saw Amanda, she would hug me and say how grateful she was for my help, and my resolve to establish boundaries would weaken. She was my only child, my connection to John, and I couldn't bear the thought of her struggling if I had the means to help, even if those means were rapidly diminishing. The pattern of financial dependence took a new turn when Derek finally launched his tech startup, focusing on social media marketing for small businesses. He needed investors and naturally turned to me. With enthusiasm that seemed genuine, he presented detailed business plans, market analyses, and profit projections. The numbers looked promising, even to my mathematically trained eye. "This is it, Norma," he said during a dinner at my house. "The opportunity that will change everything. Within a year, I'll not only pay back everything you've given us, but set you up so comfortably you'll never have to worry about money again." Amanda sat beside him, eyes shining with pride and hope. "Mom, Derek has worked so hard on this. All the experts say social media marketing is the future." I hesitated, thinking of John's cautious voice in my head. He had always said, "Never lend money to family unless you're prepared to consider it a gift." But this wasn't lending, was it? This was investing in my daughter's future, in her happiness. I withdrew $85,000 from my retirement savings, nearly a third of what remained, and invested it in Derek's company, Clickmasters Digital. Derek promised quarterly reports and a formal contract, but somehow the paperwork was always being finalized by the lawyers. For the first 6 months, things looked promising. Derek sent me enthusiastic emails about new clients and expanding services. He mentioned impressive revenue figures that made my investment seem wise. I began to hope that perhaps this time Derek would fulfill his promises. Then came the social media posts. Amanda sharing photos of their new luxury SUV. Derek posing beside a boat belonging to a new business contact. Vacation pictures from a week-long trip to Bali. Shopping bags from designer stores. Each image stabbed at my heart as I sat in my aging home, carefully budgeting my remaining savings and pension. 3 quarters passed without any financial return on my investment. No quarterly reports materialized. When I finally gathered the courage to ask Derek directly about repayment during a Sunday dinner at their newly renovated apartment, his dismissal was immediate. "The business is in growth phase, Norma. Any business person knows you don't pull out profits during expansion. We're reinvesting everything to scale up." His tone suggested I was financially illiterate, despite my decades of careful money management. "But you promised repayment would begin after 6 months, I reminded him gently, conscious of Amanda watching from across the room. Market conditions changed. We had to pivot our strategy. He waved his hand dismissively. "Besides, isn't your daughter's security worth more than money sitting in a bank account? This investment is for Amanda's future too." When I pressed further mentioning the expensive purchases they'd been making, Amanda joined the conversation. "Mom, those things are necessary for Derek's business image. Clients expect a certain level of success, and the vacation was a gift from Derek's business partner. Her defensive tone hurt more than Derek's dismissal. "Why are you being so demanding about money? It's not like you have expensive hobbies or travel plans." I felt a deep sense of betrayal wash over me. My daughter, whom I'd sacrificed so much for, was gaslighting me about my own financial needs. I remembered John's words on his deathbed. "Make sure Amanda stands on her own feet. We've always given her too much." That night at home, I cried for the first time since John's funeral. I was 60 years old, with a depleted retirement fund, a daughter who couldn't see how she was being manipulated, and a son-in-law who saw me as nothing more than a convenient bank. I considered cutting off financial support entirely, but feared losing Amanda completely. Derek had subtly but effectively positioned himself between us, portraying himself as the reasonable one while painting me as a demanding, miserly old woman who didn't understand modern business or lifestyles. I decided to be more cautious, but couldn't bring myself to abandon my daughter. I reduced my financial contributions somewhat, but continued covering their basic expenses. The investment in Derek's business I sadly accepted was likely lost forever. I started to recognize that Derek might never respect me or repay what he owed, but I held on to hope that eventually Amanda would see him for who he truly was. Over the next 3 years, Derek's disrespect evolved from subtle jabs to open contempt. He forgot to invite me to Amanda's surprise 30th birthday party, claiming later that he thought someone else had handled the invitation. I learned about it only through Facebook photos. The next day, images of my daughter smiling, surrounded by friends, and Derek's family in a restaurant I couldn't have afforded. When I was included in family gatherings, Derek found ways to undermine me. "Amanda, remember how your mum used to make you wear those awful hand-me-down clothes to school?" he would say with a laugh. "No wonder you became so fashion-conscious as an adult." Or, "Norma still doesn't use Instagram. She's from that generation that thinks the internet is just a passing fad." Each comment delivered with a smile that dared me to object and risk seeming oversensitive. During holiday meals, he would interrupt my stories with, "We've heard this one before, Norma," even when I was speaking to someone who hadn't. He would check his phone ostentatiously when I talked about my former students or my volunteer work at the community center. The painful part wasn't just Derek's behavior, but how he gradually influenced Amanda's perception of me. My once loving daughter began to echo his subtle criticisms. "Mom, couldn't you have dressed up a little more for this dinner?" Or, "That's not exactly how it happened, Mom. Your memory is getting a bit selective." She would give Derek knowing looks during these exchanges, seeking his approval. Derek's parents, Howard and Judith, were another source of pain. They were welcomed into Amanda and Derek's home, frequently consulted on decisions, and treated with visible deference by the couple. Unlike my modest financial situation, they were genuinely wealthy from Howard's successful law practice and made no secret of subsidizing the couple's lifestyle with generous gifts. "We're taking the kids to our timeshare in Palm Springs next month," Judith would announce, not bothering to include me in the invitation. Or Howard would mention the private school fund they had established for Amanda and Derek's future children, clearly positioning themselves as the more valuable grandparents in waiting. I felt increasingly like an outsider in my own family. At gatherings, I would often find myself alone in a corner, while everyone else engaged in conversations about trips I hadn't been part of, or events I hadn't been invited to. The isolation was reminiscent of my first years after John died, but somehow more painful because it was deliberate. Meanwhile, my financial situation grew increasingly precarious. Still supporting Amanda and Derek, with $2,000 monthly for their rent and various bills, I had begun making sacrifices that affected my health and well-being. I skipped refilling my blood pressure medication some months. I sold my mother's antique silverware and some of John's woodworking tools. I turned down lunch invitations from former colleagues because I couldn't afford restaurant meals. Derek's spending habits only seemed to worsen. A new sports car appeared in their driveway. Amanda posted pictures of designer purchases. They took weekend trips to New York and Chicago, all while my requests for reduced financial support were met with stories about temporary business setbacks and promises of imminent success. It was Margaret, a mutual friend, whose daughter had worked briefly for Derek's company, who finally told me the truth. During a quiet coffee in my kitchen, she hesitantly shared what she knew. "Norma, I'm only telling you this because you deserve to know. Derek's company isn't doing well. Sarah said they've lost most of their major clients. He laid off half the staff 3 months ago and hasn't paid the remaining employees regularly. She left because her paychecks kept bouncing." I felt my hands go cold around my coffee mug. But they just bought a new car. They're always posting about success on Facebook. Margaret covered my hand with hers. "It's all for show. Sarah said Derek is obsessed with appearances. He leases everything, maxes out, credit cards, gets advances from investors. The business is hemorrhaging money, but he refuses to scale back or admit failure." This revelation should have prompted me to immediately withdraw financial support. But when I tried to establish boundaries during my next visit with Amanda, I was met with emotional manipulation. "We're going through a temporary rough patch, Mom. Derek had to let some underperforming employees go, that's all. But he's close to landing a huge client that will turn everything around." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "I thought we could count on you. Dad would have been so disappointed to see you abandoning us when things get tough." The invocation of John was a low blow that Amanda knew would be effective. I left their apartment that day, having agreed to continue the monthly support, though I reduced it slightly to $1,800, citing my own increasing medical costs. That night, I calculated how much longer my savings would last at the current rate of depletion. The answer was frightening: less than 2 years. I was 62 years old, with deteriorating health, partly due to the stress of financial insecurity. I had sacrificed my retirement security, my social life, and even some of my medical care to support a daughter who couldn't see she was married to a manipulative narcissist, and a son-in-law who treated me with open contempt. Yet I continued to make those sacrifices driven by maternal love and the fear of losing my only child. Something would have to change, but I couldn't see a way forward that didn't involve heartbreaking choices. The dinner that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration of Amanda and Derek's 5th wedding anniversary. Derek had insisted on hosting it at Benedetto, one of the most expensive Italian restaurants in Cambridge, despite my gentle suggestion that the occasion could be marked somewhere more affordable. "We only get one 5-year anniversary, Norma," he had said dismissively. "Amanda deserves the best." The guest list included Derek's parents, Howard and Judith, his younger sister Alicia, his brother Patrick, and me. I wore my best dress, a navy blue sheath I had purchased for a colleague's retirement party 3 years earlier. I'd had it altered to fit my thinner frame, a result of both stress and economizing on groceries. I arrived exactly on time to find everyone already seated at a large round table near the center of the restaurant. Derek sat at what was clearly the head position, with Amanda on his right and his mother on his left. The only empty chair was wedged between Patrick and a large potted plant, partly obscured from the rest of the table. "There you are, Norma," Derek called loudly. "We were about to order without you." His words drew attention from nearby diners, adding to my discomfort as I made my way to the isolated seat. Derek was already visibly intoxicated, his voice too loud, his gestures expansive. A half-empty bottle of expensive Barolo sat in front of him, and he immediately signaled the waiter for another as I settled into my chair. "Only the best tonight," he announced, ordering appetizers for the table without consulting anyone. "Let's start with the seafood platter, the truffled burrata, and the foie gras, and keep the wine coming." I glanced at the menu and winced at the prices. The seafood platter alone cost $120. I calculated how many weeks of blood pressure medication that represented and felt a knot form in my stomach. As the appetizers arrived, Derek dominated the conversation, speaking mostly to his parents about his latest business ventures. "We've completely disrupted the digital marketing space," he boasted, though I knew from Margaret that his company was failing. "I've got meetings next week with 2 Fortune 500 companies who want to bring us on as their exclusive social media partner." Howard nodded approvingly, while Judith beamed at her son. Amanda sat quietly beside Derek, occasionally touching his arm affectionately when he made a particularly grandiose claim. I remained silent, picking at the extravagant food without appetite. Patrick attempted small talk about the Red Sox season, but our conversation was repeatedly interrupted by Derek's loud pronouncements. When it came time to order main courses, Derek insisted everyone choose the most expensive options. "The dry-aged ribeye is incredible here," he told his father. "Mom, you have to try the lobster pasta. Price is no object tonight." I quietly ordered the least expensive pasta dish on the menu, unable to participate in this display of fictional prosperity. Derek noticed and raised an eyebrow. "Really, Norma? You come to Benedetto and order the basic spaghetti." He laughed, drawing everyone's attention to my choice. "At least get the veal. I'm paying tonight." I politely declined, aware that Derek paying likely meant another maxed-out credit card that would eventually lead to more financial pressure and ultimately more requests for my support. As the main courses arrived and the third bottle of wine was opened, Derek became increasingly boisterous and pointed in his comments. He asked Alicia about her recent promotion, comparing it favorably to Amanda's employment struggles. He questioned Patrick about his new apartment, making sure everyone knew it was in a more prestigious neighborhood than my modest home. Then he turned his attention to me. "So Norma," he said, his voice carrying across the restaurant, "how's retirement treating you?" "Still volunteering at that community center with all the other old ladies. The center does valuable work," I replied evenly. "We've just secured funding for an after-school program that will help working parents." Derek snorted. "Community centers, the last refuge of retired teachers with nothing better to do." He took another large swallow of wine. "All those years of working, and for what? A tiny pension and days filled with busy work to feel useful." I felt my cheeks grow warm, but maintained my composure. Amanda was looking uncomfortable, but said nothing to redirect her husband. "I find the work fulfilling," I said, "and my students still write to me, which is rewarding." "Students who probably all earn more than you ever did." Derek laughed. "Isn't that ironic? You educated them for success you never achieved yourself." The table had grown quiet. Howard cleared his throat disapprovingly, but Derek was too intoxicated to notice the social cues. "I've been wondering," he continued, leaning across the table toward me, his eyes gleaming with malice, poorly disguised as humor. "How does it feel to be a loser? Someone who worked her whole life just to end up broke and alone." The question hung in the air like a slap. I felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. My heart raced painfully against my ribs, and heat rushed to my face. For a moment, I was transported back to 7th grade, when Brenda Miller had mocked my second-hand clothes in front of the entire cafeteria. The same sense of exposure, of being stripped of dignity in public. Then I noticed the reactions around the table. Howard and Judith looked embarrassed but not outraged. Patrick stared at his plate. Alicia gave a nervous giggle that she quickly suppressed. And Amanda, my own daughter, laughed. It was a small, uncomfortable laugh, but a laugh nonetheless, signaling to her husband that his cruelty was acceptable. In that moment of crystalline clarity, I realized no one was going to defend me. No one was going to acknowledge that this man had taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from me while treating me with escalating disrespect. No one was going to point out that without my financial sacrifices, Derek and Amanda would have been evicted years ago. Something inside me broke. not in a way that made me collapse, but in a way that set me free. Like a dam breaking to release water that had been held back too long. I maintained my composure, my face betraying none of the seismic shift occurring within. I looked directly at Derek, then slowly around the table, meeting each person's eyes before returning to him. I smiled. Not the accommodating smile I had worn for years while swallowing insults and writing checks, but a new smile, one that contained the strength I had forgotten I possessed. "I was just wondering," I said clearly, my voice steady and carrying easily across the table. "How does it feel to know that this loser will no longer pay your bills?" The table fell completely silent. Derek's smirk froze on his face. "Come on, Norma, it was just a joke," he said, attempting to laugh it off. "Don't be so sensitive." "It wasn't a joke to me," I replied calmly. "Just as it isn't a joke that I've given you $178,500 over the past 5 years. Howard and Judith exchanged startled glances. Clearly they had no idea about the extent of my financial support. "Mom," Amanda hissed, "this isn't the time or place." "When would be a good time, Amanda? When I've depleted my entire retirement fund, when I can no longer afford my heart medication, when I'm forced to sell my home because I've subsidized your husband's failures and lies." Derek's face had turned an ugly shade of red. "You don't know what you're talking about. My business is on the verge of a major breakthrough." "Your business has been failing for over a year," I said. "You've lost most of your clients, laid off half your staff, and your remaining employees aren't being paid regularly." "Who told you that?" Derek demanded, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. "It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that you've lied to everyone at this table, especially your wife, about your business success, while continuing to spend lavishly on appearances and treating me with increasing contempt." I turned to Amanda, whose face had gone pale. "I've supported you both financially because I love you and wanted to help. But my support has been repaid with disrespect and manipulation. I've been treated as an ATM rather than a mother or mother-in-law." I stood up, my movements deliberate and controlled. "I won't be contributing to your expenses anymore. The $5,000 check I wrote for this anniversary dinner and gift will be my final contribution." "You can't just cut us off," Derek sputtered. "We have rent due next week." "Yes, I can, and you have jobs, or at least Amanda does. Perhaps it's time you found one too, instead of playing entrepreneur with other people's money." I reached for my purse and jacket. "I'll always be your mother, Amanda, and I'll always love you. But I won't enable this unhealthy dynamic anymore. When you're ready to have a relationship based on mutual respect, I'll be waiting." With dignity that surprised even me, I walked out of Benedetto. My hands were shaking as I retrieved my car from the valet, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. The drive home was a blur of alternating emotions. Grief for the relationship with my daughter that would likely be damaged, at least temporarily. Rage at Derek's years of manipulation and disrespect. Fear about the confrontation that would inevitably follow. But beneath these emotions ran a current of something I hadn't felt in a long time: self-respect. I had finally stood up for myself after years of allowing my boundaries to be trampled and my generosity to be exploited. At home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in John's old armchair, half expecting the phone to ring immediately with Amanda's angry call. But the evening remained quiet, giving me space to process what I had done and begin planning my next steps. Around midnight, the calls began. First Amanda, alternating between tearful apologies and accusations that I had humiliated them in front of everyone. Then Derek, his voice slurred and threatening, claiming I had ruined their special night and would regret my little power play. I listened calmly to Amanda telling her I loved her, but needed time to think. I hung up on Derek after his first threat and silenced my phone for the rest of the night. Sleep eluded me as I made lists and plans. By dawn, I had outlined a clear path forward. one that would require courage and potentially painful conversations, but would ultimately restore my financial security and self-respect. Whatever came next, I knew I had taken the first critical step toward reclaiming my life. My transformation began the very next morning. I rose early after a restless night, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized by the decision I had made. This would be the day I reclaimed control of my life. My first stop was Boston Federal Credit Union, where I had maintained accounts for over 30 years. Amanda and Derek were authorized users on one of my accounts, an arrangement I had set up to make transferring money to them easier. I arrived when the doors opened at 9 and asked to speak with Janet, a manager I knew personally. I need to remove 2 authorized users from my accounts immediately, I explained, sliding Amanda and Derek's information across her desk. And I'd like to open a new checking account with only my name on it. I'll be transferring most of my funds there. Janet looked concerned. Is everything all right, Norma? It will be, I replied with newfound confidence. I'm making some overdue changes to protect myself financially. With the banking changes completed, I drove directly to Anderson Financial Advisors, where I had scheduled an emergency appointment with Philip the consultant, who had helped me after John's death. Frankly, Norma, I've been concerned about the withdrawals from your accounts, Philip said after I explained my situation. At the current rate, you would deplete your retirement savings entirely within 18 months. That stops today, I told him firmly. I need to restructure everything to ensure my long-term security. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed my finances in detail. The picture was sobering, but not hopeless. If I stopped supporting Amanda and Derek, immediately sold my house for something smaller, and was careful with expenses, I could still have a financially stable retirement. Philip helped me create a detailed budget and investment strategy to rebuild what I had lost. My third stop was the most difficult phone call to Brian Kellerman, the property manager for Amanda and Derek's luxury apartment building. For 3 years, I had been sending checks directly to him for their $2,000 monthly rent. I'm calling to give notice that I will no longer be paying rent for apartment 502 after this month, I said when he answered. I see, Brian replied professionally. The current tenants will need to take over the payments or provide notice if they plan to vacate. I understand. I've already informed them of this change, but I wanted to notify you officially as well, since my name is on the payment history. With these immediate practical matters addressed, I turned my attention to the inevitable confrontation with Amanda. Rather than waiting for her to come to me, I decided to take control of the conversation. I called and asked to meet her for coffee at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. She arrived 20 minutes late, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Her expression a mix of anger and anxiety. How could you embarrass us like that in front of Derek's entire family? She demanded, before even sitting down. Do you have any idea how awkward things are now? I remained calm. I understand why you're upset, Amanda. Public confrontations aren't my preference either. But after years of disrespect and financial exploitation, something had to change. Mom, we never exploited you. We were going through tough times and you offered to help. Initially, yes, but it became expected rather than appreciated. And the help was supposed to be temporary, not a 5-year subsidy of a lifestyle beyond your means. I took her hand across the table. Amanda, I've depleted over half my retirement savings supporting you and Derek. I've skipped medication, sold cherished possessions, and lived in increasing financial anxiety while watching you post pictures of luxury purchases on Facebook. Her face crumpled slightly, the first sign that my words were penetrating the defensive wall Derek had helped her build. I didn't know about the medication, she whispered. There's a lot you don't know, including the true state of Derek's business. I shared what Margaret had told me, watching Amanda's expression shift from disbelief to uncertainty. He says they're just going through a restructuring phase, that big clients are coming. He's been saying that for years, honey. Meanwhile, I've given you nearly $180,000 since your wedding." Amanda's eyes widened. "It can't be that much." I slid a piece of paper across the table, a detailed accounting of every payment I'd made: rent, utilities, car payments, cash transfers, the business investment. The total was highlighted at the bottom: $178,547. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at the number. I had no idea it was so much. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Amanda. I'm telling you because I love you too much to continue enabling a situation that isn't healthy for any of us. I'm making changes to secure what remains of my retirement, and you and Derek will need to make changes too." Her phone buzzed repeatedly during our conversation, Derek's name flashing on the screen. She declined the calls, but grew increasingly anxious. "He's going to be furious," she said, a note of fear in her voice that troubled me deeply. "Amanda, does Derek's anger frighten you?" She looked away, neither confirming nor denying. "He just gets really intense when he's stressed. He's under a lot of pressure right now." I wanted to pursue this concerning revelation, but knew pushing too hard would only make her defensive. Instead, I outlined the changes I had made that morning and explained that my financial support would end completely after the current month. "We can't afford that apartment without your help," she said, panic rising in her voice. "I know you'll need to find something within your actual budget based on your actual income. Most people live within their means, Amanda. It's what your father and I did all our lives." She left our meeting in tears, but with a better understanding of my decision. I returned home emotionally drained, but resolute, knowing the hardest conversation was yet to come. Derek's call arrived that evening, his voice alternating between threatening and cajoling. "You have no right to cut us off without warning," he shouted. "We have commitments, a lease, car payments." "I gave you 5 years of support and multiple warnings about setting boundaries," I replied evenly. "Your financial difficulties are not emergencies for me to solve anymore." We'll see what Amanda thinks when I tell her we have to move to some crappy apartment because her mother suddenly decided to be selfish. That would be an inaccurate characterization, Derek, but you're free to explain the situation however you want, just as I'm free to stop writing checks to support your lifestyle. When manipulation failed, he resorted to threats. "You might regret this decision, Norma. I know things about your taxes, about that little side business you had tutoring students for cash. It would be a shame if the IRS got an anonymous tip." "That's an interesting approach to take with someone who's given you nearly $200,000, I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. "I've documented every payment, Derek, every check, every wire transfer, every cash withdrawal, followed by your text messages thanking me. If you want to escalate this situation into something ugly, I'm prepared for that path too." The line went silent for a moment. Then, "This isn't over," he said, and hung up. I sat in my quiet living room, hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation, but mind clear. For the first time in years, I had stood my ground without backing down or compromising my well-being. The road ahead would be difficult, but I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life and dignity. The week that followed was one of profound adjustment. Amanda maintained a hurt silence, responding to my messages with single words or not at all. Derek called several more times each conversation, shorter and less threatening, as he realized my resolve was firm. Surprisingly, I received a call from Judith, Derek's mother. "Norma, I owe you an apology," she said hesitantly. "Howard and I had no idea you were supporting Amanda and Derek to such an extent. We thought our contributions were supplementing their income, not yours." "Thank you for calling, Judith. It's been a difficult situation." "Derek has always been challenging," she admitted. "Entitled since childhood. We probably enabled that behavior too much." It was the closest thing to an honest conversation we'd ever had, and it helped confirm I wasn't crazy for finally setting boundaries. With my financial obligations to Amanda and Derek ended, I turned my attention to my own future. I listed my 3-bedroom home for sale, working with a realtor, to find a comfortable 1-bedroom apartment that would significantly reduce my monthly expenses. I returned to my doctor and resumed all my medications, prioritizing my health again after years of dangerous economizing. The most difficult adjustment was emotional, not financial. I missed Amanda terribly and worried about her constantly. Had I done the right thing? Would our relationship recover? Was she safe with a husband whose anger seemed to frighten her? I reminded myself daily that enabling their financial irresponsibility wasn't truly helping Amanda. She needed to see Derek's true character without the cushion of my constant bailouts. It was a painful lesson, but perhaps a necessary one. 3 weeks after the dinner confrontation, Amanda called to tell me they were moving to a smaller apartment across the river in Somerville. Her voice was subdued, lacking the accusatory tone of our earlier conversations. "The lease here is up next month anyway," she said, "and Derek agrees we need to cut expenses." "That sounds like a sensible decision," I replied, carefully neutral. "I've also applied for a full-time position at the marketing firm where I've been doing contract work. The pay isn't amazing, but it's stable." "I'm proud of you, Amanda. That's a positive step forward." There was a long pause before she asked hesitantly, "How are you doing, Mom?" It was the first time since the confrontation that she had expressed interest in my well-being. A small olive branch, perhaps. "I'm doing better, taking care of my health-making plans. I've decided to sell the house." "The house? But you love that house." "I do, but it's too large for one person and too expensive to maintain. I'll find somewhere cozier that doesn't deplete my savings." After we hung up, I sat holding the phone, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. A small indication that perhaps with time and firm boundaries, my relationship with my daughter could heal. 6 months passed, like a slow changing of seasons. My 3-bedroom colonial with the sprawling garden John had loved sold quickly, and I found a sunny 1-bedroom apartment in a senior living community that offered both independence and some social opportunities. The move was emotional, but liberating, forcing me to sort through decades of possessions and memories, keeping only what truly mattered to me now. My health improved dramatically once I resumed proper medical care, and the constant stress of financial depletion eased. My blood pressure normalized, my chronic headaches diminished, and I began sleeping through the night again. I even lost the 10 pounds my doctor had been encouraging me to shed for years. At the community centre, I expanded my volunteer hours, finding purpose in helping organise their new after-school programme for low-income students. The work connected me to my teaching roots without the administrative pressures of formal education. The centre became a social hub as well, introducing me to other retirees with similar interests. I rekindled old friendships that had withered during my years of focus on Amanda and Derek's needs. My college roommate Elaine and I began monthly lunch dates. I rejoined my book club and the community garden committee. I even started taking a watercolor painting class on Thursday evenings, something I had always wanted to try, but never made time for while teaching. The financial restructuring Philip had helped me implement was working well. With drastically reduced living expenses and no more subsidizing of Amanda and Derek, my remaining savings and pension provided a modest but sufficient income. I could even occasionally splurge on small luxuries like concert tickets or dinner with friends without the anxiety that had previously accompanied any personal expenditure. My relationship with Amanda evolved slowly during this period. Our early conversations after the confrontation were strained and infrequent, limited to practical matters and careful small talk. But gradually, as she adjusted to their new financial reality, something shifted. The catalyst came 3 months after they moved to the smaller apartment in Somerville. Amanda called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Mom, can I come see you tomorrow?" "Alone." She arrived at my new apartment the next afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Without preamble, she said, "I think you were right about Derek." Over cups of tea at my small kitchen table, she revealed that they had begun marriage counseling at her insistence after their financial circumstances changed so dramatically. The counselor suggested we each take financial accountability classes separately. I've been going every week. Derek went once and refused to return. The classes had opened Amanda's eyes to the unhealthy financial patterns in their relationship. The instructor asked us to create honest personal financial histories. When I included everything you'd given us, the instructor was shocked. She said it was financial abuse to take advantage of a parent that way. Amanda had begun examining other aspects of their relationship with new clarity. Derek always has reasons why our problems are someone else's fault. Your fault for not giving enough, his parents' fault, for not connecting him with the right people, his employees' fault, for not working hard enough. She had also discovered credit card statements revealing Derek's secret expenditures on gambling websites and expensive gifts for a female business associate. I confronted him and he exploded, said I was spying on him, that I didn't understand the pressures he was under. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He threw his phone at the wall. It's not the first time he's thrown things when angry. My heart ached for her. Amanda, I'm so sorry. Are you safe? She nodded. He's never directed his anger physically at me, but the counselor says the pattern is concerning. We're trying to work through it. He's agreed to individual therapy. I listened without judgment, offering support, without pushing for any specific course of action. This was Amanda's journey, and she needed to find her own way through it. What mattered most was that she was beginning to see the truth about her marriage. Over the following months, Amanda and I cautiously rebuilt our relationship. She began visiting me regularly, sometimes bringing updates about their counseling progress, sometimes just to share a meal and conversation. Derek remained conspicuously absent from these visits, and from our discussions, a silent acknowledgement of the damage in that relationship. Then came the day she arrived at my door, unannounced, a small suitcase in hand, and devastation on her face. "He's been having an affair," she said simply, "with his new marketing assistant. She's 24. I held my daughter while she cried, her body shaking with the force of her grief. Not grief for the loss of Derek, I realized as she spoke, but grief for the years wasted and the humiliation of betrayal. I found their messages. It's been going on for months. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He said I'd become too negative, too focused on budgeting and responsibility. Said I wasn't fun anymore. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. He blamed me for the affair, Mom. Said if I hadn't insisted on moving to a cheaper place, if I hadn't forced him into counseling, if I hadn't become so boring about money, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. That's not how committed relationships work, I said gently. His choices are his responsibility, not yours. Amanda stayed with me for 2 weeks, sleeping on my pull-out sofa, while she processed her emotions and considered her next steps. We talked more openly than we had in years, about her marriage, about my financial support, about the dynamics that had led us both to enable Derek's behavior for so long. I don't think I ever really knew him, she admitted one evening. I saw what I wanted to see, the ambitious, charming man with big dreams. I ignored the red flags because I was afraid of being alone after Dad died. We both did, I acknowledged. I saw how happy he made you initially, and I wanted that to be real more than I wanted to see the truth. The irony of Derek's current situation wasn't lost on either of us. After moving out of their apartment and in with his young assistant, he had finally been forced to find actual employment. The much-touted business had quietly folded, leaving him with a mountain of debt and damaged professional relationships. He was now working as a junior account manager at a small marketing firm, earning less than Amanda, with her newly secured full-time position. "He called yesterday," Amanda told me. "Asked if I'd reconsider, said he made a mistake. When I refused, he asked if I could loan him money for a security deposit on a new apartment. Said he'd pay me back when things turn around." We both burst into laughter, the kind that comes from recognizing an absurdity that once would have seemed reasonable. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I suggested he ask his parents, or get a second job, or learn to live within his means." Amanda decided not to rush into divorce proceedings, instead opting for a formal separation agreement that protected her finances, while she continued individual therapy and rebuilt her independence. At 35, she was essentially starting over, moving into her own modest apartment, and learning to manage her finances independently for the first time in her adult life. Our relationship healed more completely during this period than I could have hoped. Without Derek's influence creating distance between us, we rediscovered our natural affection and easy communication. Amanda began joining me for community center events, volunteering alongside me in the after-school program, reconnecting with the values she'd grown up with. One evening, as we walked along the Charles River, enjoying the fall foliage, Amanda took my hand. "I need to thank you properly, Mum." "For what, sweetheart?" "For having the courage to stop enabling us when it would have been easier to continue. If you hadn't stood up at that dinner, I might never have seen the truth about my marriage or about myself." I squeezed her hand. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I was terrified of losing you." "Instead, you got the real me back," she smiled, "and I got my self-respect back." The journey of the past year had taught me profound lessons about the nature of genuine support versus enabling, about the courage required to establish healthy boundaries, and about the resilience of authentic relationships. I had rediscovered my own strength at 63, finding that it wasn't too late to reclaim my life and rebuild what had been damaged. While the financial losses couldn't be fully recovered, the personal gains in health, self-respect, and genuine connection with my daughter were ultimately more valuable. I had stopped being a convenience and started being a mother again. Not just giving Amanda what she wanted, but helping her discover what she truly needed. My story isn't unique. Many parents find themselves trapped in unhealthy patterns of financial support and emotional manipulation with adult children or their partners. Breaking free requires tremendous courage and often temporary pain, but standing up for yourself doesn't mean abandoning those you love. Sometimes it's the most powerful way to help them find their own strength. If you're in a similar situation, remember that it's never too late to establish boundaries and reclaim your dignity. The path forward may be difficult, but the alternative is the slow erosion of your financial security, your self-respect, and ultimately, your most important relationships. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between continuing to help someone financially and protecting your own well-being? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about finding strength in life's most challenging moments. Thank you for listening. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that benefits everyone involved in the long run.